A checkmating pattern is a specific position of your as well as opponent's pieces that can lead to a quick checkmate. And for this video, I've selected the top 10 most common checkmating patterns that really happen in real-life games. Not in some artificially created chess puzzles, but those that you can actually see in your games frequently. Knowing chess patterns helps you either to recognize them if the position like that shows up in your game, or to intentionally create it in your own game. And either way, knowing the pattern, knowing the end goal makes it a lot easier to understand what moves you gotta play in order to reach this final destination. I'm Grandmaster Igor Smirnov, and without further ado, let's go ahead and go to the checkmating pattern number 1. The first and most common mating pattern is queen and a supporting piece. So queen plus a supporter. Why is that so? Well, since queen is the most powerful piece that you've got, it attacks the most number of squares, there is no surprise that a checkmate is usually delivered by a queen. But it needs a supporting piece, or else it will simply be captured by an opponent's king. For example, in the current position, which arose from the Smith-Morra Gambit, if you don't know this opening, I'll link it also in the card and description below. It's a pretty good opening to play, actually, especially as white. Here, black can go knight g4. We've got the queen here looking towards the white's king, and we need one more supporting piece. So black is trying to set it up for this kind of a checkmate. Queen goes all the way forward to h2, delivering the checkmate. And white may feel annoyed about this, even though temporarily this square is covered by the knight, but nevertheless, it's pretty obvious that black is trying to set it up for a quick checkmate, so white usually responds with pawn h3, trying to push this knight away. And here there is a killing counter-strike, knight d4. Instead of moving this knight backward, black is playing knight d4, attacking both the queen and the knight, therefore white has to react to this threat. And if they go ahead and take this knight or do anything else, black will execute their main intent, queen going all the way forward to h2, and it's a checkmate, because notice that the queen is supported by the knight, therefore it cannot be captured by the king, and it is actually a checkmate. Very common, most common checkmating patterns of all. Here's the second most common checkmating pattern. In this position, if you think about this for a second and how would you proceed here as white, there are many moves. You can try to advance your knight, maybe you can try to bring this knight over there, or maybe give way to your queen to be brought somewhere there. There is like a lot of options for white. But if you know the checkmating pattern, which is a bishop and a queen battery, then things get really simple. So white can play here queen to d3, repairing on the next move after black does something, doesn't really matter. Let's say they try to hide their king in the corner. You can then finish this battery by playing bishop to c2, and now your pieces are lining up against the black's king, and there is nothing they can do against queen takes h7 checkmate on the next move. It's a very simple idea, and yet it's still very effective. You can easily see that, in a way, it's similar to the previous pattern, queen plus a supporter, but nevertheless, it stands a separate case, because this is a battery. Along the diagonal, we have two long-range pieces, which is queen and the bishop, and therefore they can stand on your half of the board and still aim at the opponent's king. Also, a very common checkmating pattern. As you can see, if you know it, then you know how to construct it in your own games. This position arises from the exchange variation in the Ryla pass, and looking at this position, it's hard to believe that black can possibly deliver a checkmate in just 5 moves, and yet it happened in thousands of games, because black knew the next checkmating pattern, which is queen and rook battery. It's kind of similar to the previous one, bishop and rook battery. Here we still use the two long-range pieces to set it up for a quick checkmate. So what's the situation here? The good thing about this pattern is that you have a lot of preconditions necessary for this checkmate happening in 99% of your games. Like usually your opponent will castle, and you've got the rook here on the edge of the board, which potentially aims towards the king. Of course, currently it's blocked by this pawn from the h7 square, therefore you really gotta figure out what to do, how to get rid of this pawn. And very often you need to push it forward, trade it off, and open up the rook so that it can get involved into your attack. But in the current position, black found another way, which is also a typical pattern. Black first played bishop g4, setting up this pin. White usually tries to kick it off, but then instead of moving the bishop back, black supported the bishop by their own pawn, offering the sacrifice. And if white is unfamiliar with this trap, they'll probably go ahead and take the bishop, and now you achieved your goal. You opened up the h-file, And also you're attacking here the knight. Therefore, the knight may wish to go away and, for example, take your pawn. And now you finish this pattern by playing queen h4. And now you have this perfect battery of both queen and the rook lining up together against the white's king. And on the next move, usually you can deliver a checkmate either on h2 or h1 square. Very simple and still very effective. By the way, there is one question I'd like to ask you about. What if white moves their pawn to f4, trying to provide this escape path for their king? How do you proceed here? Please think about it and write it down in the comments below if you can find it, so that you can also remember it better. Here's the checkmating pattern number 4, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's number 4. This is also a very classical position which arose from the Stainis variation of the Rel pass. Here white noticed that they can grab this pawn on a5, and they gladly went for it, and they decided to trade the queens over here and grab this pawn on e5. But all of a sudden black took the pawn on e4, and white thought to himself, wait a moment, I can just go ahead and win the exchange over here, and at the end of this line I'm a piece up. And black says, it's all good, but you missed one of the most common checkmating patterns, which is a back rank checkmate. Black goes rook d1, and even though white can't sacrifice their rook, overall it's a checkmate. It often happens when your opponent's king is stuck behind these pawns of their castling, therefore it has no way to escape, and you only need to bring your rook over here and it's a checkmate. It usually happens closer to the end of the game where some pieces are already exchanged, because otherwise usually white pieces cover it, but nevertheless that's one of the most common ways to win against a beginner level opponent. You can actually execute a back rank checkmate even against an experienced opponent, but in this case usually you'll need to go in a more advanced version of a back rank checkmate. In this case, for instance, white can go ahead and play rook b8, having kind of a similar position to a back rank checkmate, but in this case it's not a game over because black has got the bishop over here and black can cover their king. Now they have this escape square for their king, and therefore in order to set it up for a back rank checkmate, you gotta take aim at this square, you gotta get it away from the black's king, and the way to do that is to play bishop h6, and now this bishop is controlling the square as well as the square of f8, and black is helpless. If they play f5 or anything else, you go ahead and play rook takes f8, and it's still a back rank checkmate, even though a more advanced version, which again can happen even against an experienced opponent. Before going to the next mating pattern, let me have a quick announcement that we're going to open up the next enrollment into our flagship course, the Grandmaster's Positional Understanding, soon, and if you want to be notified when the enrollment is available, you can click the link below the video and join the waitlist. This way you'll not miss this opportunity, because this is one of the best courses that I've ever created, and students of the previous cohorts who studied these courses together with my support and support from other students very often found themselves improving 100-200 rating points just from this single course alone. Therefore, you may give it a try as well. And now let's come back to the next checkmating pattern number 5. Looking at this position, one of the most played position of all, it's hard to believe that you can win and actually checkmate your opponent's king in less than 10 moves if you know the next checkmating pattern. The first move here is d4, going into the Scotch gambit, and after that you go knight g5. A sudden move that can easily get your opponent out of their opening preparation, and they'll think that this knight is a bit annoying. Maybe you can play bishop c4 and go after this pawn or something like this, and therefore they usually go pawn h6, trying to move the knight away. But instead of moving it back, you sacrifice it on f7, and that's the next checkmating pattern, sacrificing your piece on this f7 square. Why is this a pattern? Well, it usually happens in an opening stage where your opponent's king is still in the middle of the board, and the best way to get it out, to expose the king, is to sacrifice your piece, typically a knight, on this f7 square. The f7 square is the weakest, it's only supported by the king, and therefore taking it there forces your opponent's king to go out and be completely exposed. Now you can attack it with the bishop, you can attack it with a queen along this diagonal, and you can easily see that black is already somewhat in trouble. After you go here bishop c4, strangely enough, majority of players try to hide back on e8, which is a wrong move, and it leads to a forcing checkmate. Queen h5, now queen to f7, the king has to go forward, and now it's quite clear that black is in big trouble, and within a couple of moves the king is gonna be checkmated like this. Of course, black could play some other moves, and I've got actually a dedicated video about the Scotch gambit, which I'll link below and in the YouTube card, which you can check out. But overall, you can clearly see this checkmating pattern. You sacrifice a piece over there on f7, you drag your opponent's king away, and after that, you go after it with all of your pieces. The mating pattern number 6 is attacking your king along this diagonal h5 to e8. It's a bit similar compared to the previous one, but there is a difference because in this case we're not trying to sacrifice our piece here on f7, but we're trying to anyway expose this diagonal, take advantage of it. Again, the king is only covered by the pawn along this diagonal. This pawn on f7 is not supported by anything else. Moreover, sometimes black will voluntarily push this pawn forward, trying to get involved in the battle in the center of the board. And of course, it can also happen with the reverse color, you know, when you're attacking the white king, and very often you'll find white players push the f-pawn forward in the king's gambit in many openings where it happens. Therefore, all in all, your goal is to attack along this diagonal and either waiting for the white's pawn to be moved or to provoke it somehow, to deflect the pawn from this position of f2, and after that, bringing your queen over here can potentially put white in a checkmating position. Let's take a look at one easy example of this. In the Carcan defense, after pawn e4 and pawn goes to c6, here one of the ways is to go bishop d3. And if black continues bringing their knight out to keep attacking the white center, then after pawn e5 and knight to d7, you've got a chance to execute this mating pattern, of course, if you're familiar with it. We know that the goal number 1 is to deflect this pawn, and you can achieve this by playing pawn e6, sacrificing your pawn in order to deflect the black's pawn from this f7 square, and now you have the perfect checkmating pattern queen h5, attacking the king. The only way to defend it is to cover it by the pawn, but then you can sacrifice either your bishop or even your queen here on this g6 square, and after that it leads to the checkmate along this diagonal. So really cool checkmating pattern, again very simple and elegant. The mating pattern number 7 is a Greek gift sacrifice. A very popular one. I executed it myself at least several times in standard over the board games and countless times in blitz games. Here it's white to play, and you can start an attack by playing bishop takes h7. When your opponent's king is castled, very often you need to sacrifice or somehow destroy the pawn shield so that you can get the king out, and after that you can start attacking it. Here after king takes, you continue with knight going here, g5 check, attack to the king. If it tries to hide back, then you continue with queen to h5, threatening queen h7 checkmate, as well as the queen is somewhat taking aim at this pawn on f7. And if black tries to play rook e8, which is the only way really, then there is this forcing line which leads to a checkmate. You just keep attacking the king, keep chasing it, and at the end of the day, it's a checkmate. Mating pattern number 8 is a smothered checkmate. In this classical position of chess, you can set up a nasty trap by playing knight to d4, offering the sacrifice of this pawn on e5, and if white accepts it, then all of a sudden you rush into the attack by playing queen g5, with a double attack to this knight over here and this pawn. Since the knight anyway needs to go somewhere, white may go ahead and take your pawn here on f7. Then you take this pawn, attacking the rook here in the corner. Therefore, the rook will wish to go. Then you take this pawn on e4. It is check to the white's king. Therefore, white needs to cover it. And in this position, all of a sudden, you can deliver a smothered checkmate with your knight. Knight goes here to f3. Even though it's not the most common checkmating pattern, it nevertheless happens in real games. There are many opening traps involving a smothered checkmate like this, and it's useful to know it. Because even though the white's king seems to be surrounded by the defenders, you can find this sneaky way to deliver a checkmate with your knight, taking advantage of the fact that the knight can attack from a distance, and because the bishop is pinned, it cannot go, it is a checkmate, so this is another cool thing to know. The mating pattern number 9 helps you win theoretical endgame positions. Many players find themselves in a trouble when they need to win a position like this, with a knight and a bishop against a king, or two bishops against a king, or rook and a bishop against a rook. Those kind of theoretical positions puzzle many players. But just knowing this single pattern will make your life a lot easier. You'll know how to convert an advantage and how to win a position like that. By the way, I'm sorry for making this video a bit long. I just wanted to bring as much value as I can, and thank you for being patient, because there are hundreds of mating patterns and I've took a lot of time to select the top 10 most common ones, those that I do believe will happen in many of your games. Therefore, again, thanks for sticking around. I promise that you will not be disappointed. You'll win many games following the material of this video. Alright, anyway. What do you do when you need to checkmate a king when you've got a knight and a bishop? The checkmating pattern here says that you gotta bring your king to the 6th rank while keeping your opponent's king on the last rank. So that is it. And you can do this fairly easily because you've got a material advantage, and therefore you can restrict and push your opponent's king away, and ultimately you can get to a position like this. The main thing that you gotta pay attention here is that you've got your king on the 6th rank on g6. That's the key element of the white's checkmating pattern. Having your king here does a lot of good job here. First of all, the king takes away so many squares from your opponent's king. In addition to that, an opponent's king is also restricted by the edge of the board, so it cannot go backwards, right? And therefore, it only has actually 2 squares to go, and in the current position only 1 square, because the square f8 is controlled by the bishop, so it only can go back and forth over here in the corner of the board. And that is why it's so easy for you to win a position like this, because now all you gotta do is to bring your knight closer, and you can do this easily again because the king's stuck here in the corner, it cannot escape from here, so you've got more than enough time to bring your knight closer, and after that you deliver a checkmate. For example, if it's black to play, they go king h8, and you just play bishop g7 followed by knight f6 checkmate. So again, very often in positions like that, you only need to bring your king to the 6th rank, restrict your opponent's king that way, and after that, a checkmate will happen relatively easily. For example, if you need to win a position with a king and 2 bishops against a lonely king, it makes no difference. It's all the same thing. You bring your king over here to g6 so that it restricts your opponent's king, and after that, you deliver a checkmate just like this. You can see that it's really simple, whether you have a bishop and a knight or 2 bishops. When you know this checkmating pattern, you deliver a checkmate very easily. And here is a final example for this pattern. The positions with a rook and a bishop against a rook are one of the most complex ones for winning it. Even title players have a hard time often in these positions. But again, it's all the same stuff. You bring your king over here on the 6th rank while keeping your opponent's king in the opposition, right? Standing like that, so that your king takes away all the squares where your opponent's king can go to. Well, not all of them, but most of them. So here, if it's white to play, you can easily see that the black's king is already quite restricted there, and you only need to swing your rook over here, and on the next move, regardless of what black do, it's rook to a8, checkmate. Again, very simple. Of course, it takes time and effort to set it up for this, but again, having a material advantage, it's usually simple to push your opponent's king back by attacking it, and then you deliver a checkmate like this. Mating pattern number 10. Whoa, you made it thus far, so you've got what it takes to be a great player, because it takes some patience and willingness to study. It's white to move, and this pattern is sacrifice on h6. Usually your opponent will castle their king, and very often they'll play this prophylactic move pawn h6 so that your bishop cannot go there. Or they'll try to push your bishop away where it's already standing over there on g5. They'll try to push it away by pushing their pawn forward. So very often their pawn will be there. And the idea here is to set it up, the battery, with your bishop and a queen, and after that you sacrifice your bishop over there on h6, and black recaptures, and now you can get your queen involved. We already know that usually a checkmate is delivered by the queen. Therefore, bringing your queen that close, as well as exposing the opponent's king, is a big deal for white. And usually after that, you will be able to finish the game off. Even though right now you don't threaten queen h7 right now because the square is covered by the opponent's knight, but you can bring more pieces into the attack easily. For example, you can bring your knight over here, you can even consider bringing your rook somewhere, and you only need to deflect this knight somehow from f6, and then it's checkmate. And this position, for example, is winning for white, because you've got this long-term attack. You can also deliver checks over here to g5, and you just threaten to capture the knight. You've got really so many threats here. That's why it's so overwhelming. And if black ever moves their knight away, let's say something like this, that is just queen h7 checkmate. So this is the final, most common checkmating pattern number 10, attack and sacrifice your bishop on h6. Don't forget to join the waitlist by clicking the link below the video so that I can notify you when the next cohort of students is accepted for our flagship course, the Grandmaster's Positional Understanding. As always, all the videos that I mentioned previously will be linked in the description below the video, the Smith-Morra Gambit, as well as everything else. Best of luck, stay tuned, and I'll talk to you soon.